Hello everyone and welcome to Byjus Exam Prep IAS. Today in this session we are going to have a discussion on the newspaper of 10th of April 2024. So let's begin with the list of topics first. These are the four topics that we are going to discuss in detail today. One, a distinct right, and second, climate crisis is not gender neutral. These are two articles related to an analysis that we did yesterday as well. So these are two editorials that we have in today's newspaper. And then after that, the import restrictions on solar PV cells. Again, something that we have discussed in the past, but there is a very important article that we have today in the explained or in the text and context session. So we'll discuss that as well. And to cut a deal with Hamas or not, and this is an analysis on the ongoing Israel-Palestine issue which we have on the international relations page. And then after that, there are these four articles from the perspective of your prelims examination. One, with regard to industrial alcohol, the ruling that we have seen from the perspective, or you can say observation from the Supreme Court. And then after that, another ruling from the perspective of Supreme Court, and we'll discuss about what exactly does it mean. And unfortunately, what we see is that Peter Higgs, who had proposed the existence of God particle, he died. And then lastly, something related to telemedicine. So these are four articles from the perspective of your prelims examination that we are going to discuss. Now let's begin with the first article that we have on your editorial page, that is a distinct right. Now yesterday also we had did this discussion, and I would suggest that you go to yesterday's discussion as well. You go to 9th April discussion, and there in the prelims bites section we have actually dealt with this particular topic. So what we are doing today is a continuation of that. So if you don't have the context, I will give you the context of course, but at the same time I would also suggest that you go through the yesterday's analysis that we did as a part of prelims bites yesterday. Alright, so let's begin with the first article. Now what we see is that the Supreme Court of India has recently recognized the right to be free from adverse effects of climate change as a very distinct fundamental right. And that's why it has enhanced its stance on environmental protection and sustainable development. Now this judicial move, this is something that expands the court's previous recognition of the right to live in a clean environment as a part of Article 21 of the Indian Constitution. Now, if you remember, a few years back, this is where all the discussion had started from, when we saw the kind of smog situation that we saw in Delhi. In Delhi and all the nearby areas, the kind of smog situation that we saw in the winter months, this is where all this discussion that this is also something that should be considered as a part of Article 21 of the Indian Constitution, and that's why the right to live in a clean environment in the context of air pollution is where all this discussion started from. And this is where we see the continuation of the same discussion, that now we are not only talking about a certain pollution or problems which are just related to certain months or some issues only, but it is where it is going one step ahead and also talking about climate change. That also the effects of climate change and how effects of climate change are going to be only adverse in the coming years, then in that case it also becomes the responsibility of the government to ensure security for the people, well-being of the people of the country, and all the citizens should have a right to this. So that's why the court actually articulated the protection from climate change and a right to wholesome environment. And that's why they said that, Supreme Court said that these two are actually interconnected. Alright, this what it has said is that protection from climate change and the right to a wholesome environment, these basically are interconnected. These are interconnected in the face of increasing climate threats. And that's why this decision comes in the response to also the escalating threats that have been posed by climate change, including all the extreme weather conditions like increasing temperature or natural disasters, food shortages, all these things, crop failures that are happening, and also the shift that we have seen in the diseases as well. So all these things, they do have an impact on life and livelihood. So that's why the court highlighted that the environmental degradation and climate change could lead to acute shortage of essential resources like food and water, and it could disproportionately affect poorer sections of the society and all the underserved community, thereby also violating their right to equality. So that's why this emphasis on climate change was brought to the fore in a case which is also concerning the death of the great Indian bustard. And if you remember, we had discussed about this also in our previous discussion, where we have seen that there have been certain deaths of birds, especially in the context of the great Indian bustard. Now, in this context, what we have seen is that when it comes to the great Indian bustard, they are actually critically endangered species. There are only about 150 to 200 of them left, and that too only in India. They were also found in parts of Pakistan, but now they are not found in Pakistan anymore. They haven't been sighted in the recent past, so only in India, and that too concentrated to only a few states in India. Largely it is Rajasthan, Gujarat and parts of Maharashtra, and also a couple of areas of sighting has happened in Karnataka. So these are the only areas in India where you have the sighting of this bird. And we saw that the deaths of great Indian bustards also happened due to collisions with solar power transmission lines and wind power transmission lines in Rajasthan and Gujarat. So because there are high power transmission lines which are running in these areas, and these are the core areas of conservation of this bird as well. So that is where this also was brought into the picture. So the court previously had ordered that the power transmission lines in areas which are critical to the bird's survival, they should be made underground to prevent these kind of deaths. And this is a decision that was also conflicted with the goals of the renewable energy sector due to the very high cost of the technical challenges that are involved in making the entire transmission lines underground. So that's why we saw that there was all these controversies that happened, and following a plea that came from three of the union ministries, the Union Ministry of Environment, Power and New and Renewable Energy, we see that for modification to this order, the court basically has now tasked an expert committee for determining the feasibility of underground and overground lines, while also recalling its earlier orders at the same time. So that's why these cases, they illustrate the complex challenges that are there in the intersection of carbon emission and in promoting renewable energy and conserving the biodiversity. So there are all these aspects that we'll have to look into. So we have to see where it goes from here on, because we have to understand that these are issues that are only going to increase in the coming days and years, and that's why we all have to understand the value of all these things and how exactly can we look into these issues. Now coming to the second article, again you can say related to partially related to these issues of what we are looking at, and here the article is the climate change crisis is not gender neutral. Now what do we mean here? In this particular scenario, what we understand is that overall the impact of climate change crisis is unequal. With women and girls, they are facing disproportionately high risk, especially in the poverty stricken areas, due to the existing rules and responsibilities that they have, the cultural norms that we have. So these kind of things, they are making the problem even worse for the women as compared to men. So that's why the women and girls, they face higher health risk from climate crisis, particularly in the poverty stricken areas due to social roles and cultural norms. Now the United Nations Development Programme, or UNDP, it has indicated that women and children are significantly more likely to die in disasters. The Supreme Court of India has recognized now that the right to be free from adverse effects of climate change is a part of fundamental right to life, and that is something that emphasizes the importance of clean environment. If you consider agriculture, so that's why the report says that women and children are 14 times more likely to die in a disaster as compared to their male counterparts. And when it comes to, let's say, agriculture, which is a very crucial livelihood source for women in rural areas, this is something that is threatened by climate change. and that's why it leads to food insecurity and negative health outcomes at the same time. And women face increasingly an increased domestic burden, and also a lot of health issues, including very high risk of we see a very high risk of even violence also against them, especially in the drought prone regions, is something that we have seen. And climate change, it also increases these challenges. All right, it also further increases these challenges, and that's why it starts impacting women's physical and mental health as well. So that's why this is also something that needs to be understood, that it is related to gender-based violence, and it reduces the access to safe drinking water for women and girls as well. So overall, that's why the climate change issues, they become very problematic for them, and that's why it also leads to physical and mental health issues. You also have to understand that the burden is more on them. The burden on women, for example, let's say when water crisis starts in drought prone areas, the collection of water primarily becomes a responsibility, because of the cultural norms, I would say, has been seen to become a responsibility more for women. So if they had to travel 500 meters, now perhaps they have to travel 2 kilometers just to get access to water. So that's why we see that these kind of issues are becoming problematic, and extreme weather events, they are becoming more frequent, with a very direct correlation with the gender-based violence, and also impacting all the problems that are related to what we just discussed about safe drinking water access, and the kind of violence that also increases. And India's vulnerability to the heat waves also poses a significant risk to pregnant women, to young children, and the elderly as well. And at the same time, respiratory and cardiovascular diseases also start increasing due to different aspects of climate change, especially also if you consider air pollution as well. So that's why we understand that the risks are more. Similarly, despite the disproportionate risk that we have seen, women's involvement in climate action is crucial for achieving the global climate goals. Empowering women becomes very, very important, because empowering women would lead to a better climate solution. And this is also something that has been evidenced increasingly in the agricultural yield as well, when women have been seen to have equal resource access. Local adaptation methods and informed knowledge in women, these kind of things become very, very essential for the resilience to the kinds of issues that we are seeing. And that's why we need immediate action to mitigate the heat wave impact, water shortages problems. So all these things become very, very crucial, and that's why we need to focus on the vulnerable groups especially, and try to improve the urban planning for heat resistance as well. And local initiatives, for example, rainwater harvesting, and trying to build a capacity at village level, all these things can also enhance community resilience altogether. So that's why we need to understand the impact of all these things, that women's participation in climate action becomes very, very essential in ensuring in achieving the global climate goals. And that's why we see that we have better outcomes when women have equal access to the resources. And that's why we need to understand that we have to focus on the vulnerable groups, and try to improve the urban resilience. So overall, local initiatives and community based strategies, they become very, very crucial. And that is where we have to see that this is where we have to transform, that a gender lens on state action plans also will be very, very important, because it will emphasize on the need for gender transformative strategies to ensure equitable climate adaptation. And that's why this showcases women's role in leading in climate solution. So instead of being seen as victims, women should have the focus should be to make women the leaders in fighting back against climate change, and trying to think about the various solutions that we have in this particular scenario. So that's why from this particular scenario, we have to understand the problem that women face largely with regard to these kind of newer issues that are becoming problematic day by day. Then after that, we have this third article, and this is the import restrictions on solar PV cells. Now, what we basically see here is that overall, again, this is something that is a continuation of what we have seen in the past few articles. And when we look at what exactly this article focuses on, this is talking about India's recent governmental efforts to support the renewable energy manufacturing sector, particularly in the solar photovoltaic module industry. And these efforts, they include the re-implementation of the approved list of models and manufacturers of solar photovoltaic, which is ALMM. So we are talking about the approved list of models and manufacturers of solar photovoltaic modules. Now, what exactly do we mean by this? Initially, it was introduced, but it was then also suspended. This ALMM is now back into effect in trying to ensure government projects and those receiving the government assistance to use domestically produced solar modules. Now, this is a move where we are trying to aim to reduce India's reliance on imports, particularly from China, which has also been seen as a major supplier in the solar cells modules to India. And India has heavily depended on the imports to meet its solar photovoltaic demands. And we have seen that there is a very significant share of all these imports coming largely from China and Vietnam. Now, that's why what we have seen is that in this context, we have reintroduced the approved list of models and manufacturers of solar photovoltaic modules to ensure that government projects use domestically produced solar modules. Now, this is where we are basically saying that, look, if you are a manufacturer, if you are somebody who makes solar photovoltaics or anything related to solar photovoltaic, let's say something like a solar panel, then you have to get these products approved, a proper testing will happen, and then you will be allowed to launch into the market. Now, what happens then is that now we would be able to get, in this context, we'll be able to get better products out of the Indian market. And that's why anyone who's consuming these products, they would also rely on the Indian markets. They would also rely on the Indian made products by Indian companies, because this is where we see that the consumption will increase, and that's why the demand for manufacturing can increase in this particular scenario. Right now, what we see is that we are heavily dependent on the imports, especially from China and Vietnam. And overall, we have seen that there has been significant expenditure over the past 5 years. And in the past, let's say 5 to 7 years, we have seen that the growth in solar energy has been significant. And India has been one of the top 4 nations when it comes to the capacity addition in solar energy. So that's why it is a big data that which says that India has done a lot in the past few years with regard to solar energy. But the problem part is that most of the solar energy capacity building that we have done, it has been dependent on the imports rather than making a lot of these things or manufacturing these things in India. Manufacturing in India is happening, but it is not happening at a pace that we would have wanted. And this is where we are trying to improve upon that. We are trying to improve upon this, and we are trying that we should be able to produce more in India, manufacture more in India, and the Indian solar industry should be dependent on the Indian made products, India made products. So that is where we are right now. So that's why, to reduce the import dependency and boost domestic production, we have seen that PLI schemes also have been launched alongside the measures like custom duties and solar PV imports. So despite importing, you can say, solar components almost worth 11.17 billion over the past 5 years. All right, so that's why we know that this number has been significant. A total of 11.17 billion worth of imports have happened in the last 5 years. The government has taken steps to bolster the domestic production and reduce this dependency. And that's why the reintroduction of the ALMM list, coupled with all the production linked incentives or PLI schemes, and all the imposition of customs duty on the solar imports. These are all parts of the effort. And the China's dominance in the global solar photovoltaic market is also attributed to the cost competitive manufacturing environment that China has, and which is also supported by lower electricity cost and the government policies that have prioritized the solar photovoltaic as a strategic sector. And that's why it has enabled China to achieve economies of scale and continuous innovation across the solar photovoltaic supply chain. And that's why we see that when you look at the global supply chain of solar photovoltaics, you'll see that China has the biggest share of all the exports that of all the industries that are dependent on these kind of products. So that's why we have seen that first thing, that it has had cost effective manufacturing, low electricity cost, and strategic government policies. So they have ensured that they have been able to prioritize the solar photovoltaics, and that's why they have been leading this. Now, when it comes to India, we know that we have an ambitious target of 500 gigawatt from non-fossil fuels by 2030, correct? And we are talking about installed capacity from the non-fossil fuels. And this is something which is a very rapid growing demand for electricity as well. Correct. We know that this is in India, with the kinds of industries which are growing, we need a lot of electricity to support them. And that's why we have to recognize the vast potential of solar energy in this context. India has been working to harness the estimated solar power potential that we have. The estimated solar power potential for India is said to be approximately around 750 gigawatt. Approximately 750, or to be exact 748.99 gigawatt is supposed to be the solar potential of India, and through various different schemes and programs. And that's why we are trying to tap into this renewable energy source more towards the solar, towards the domestic sector, and ensuring that we can enhance the domestic manufacturing altogether. So that's why we have to understand that this becomes very, very crucial, and this new development that we have seen here, it will definitely help in boosting the solar energy sector in India, and it will also have a good positive impact on Indian manufacturing sector, especially in the context of the renewable energy sector, because this might also lead to an overflow that might happen to other sectors as well, and maybe we'll see a better development of wind energy, biofuels, hydrogen, etc. as well in the coming years. Now let's move on to the next article. The next article is, to cut a deal with Hamas or not, Israel Prime Minister faces tough choices. Now this is where the context of this is what we are seeing here, that overall there has been a lot of controversies, of course, and when it comes to Benjamin Netanyahu, he has been facing one of his toughest challenges yet as Israel's Prime Minister, because he is under severe pressure due to various different factors, as war on Gaza has extended almost into its 7th month. Internationally, the US and other global actors have criticized the high civilian casualties that have happened in Gaza, and that's why they have urged restraint, particularly against large-scale operations that have happened in Rafah, where humanitarian conditions are worsening for over 1.4 million Palestinians. Domestically as well, we have seen that a movement has been demanding the return of hostages taken by Hamas, and calling for Netanyahu's resignation has also gained momentum. And that's why there has been a widespread protest in many of the major cities in Israel. Now, what we know is that the conflict started after Hamas's attack on October 7th, which resulted in almost 1,200 Israeli deaths, and they had taken 253 hostages, where there are 129 hostages who are still captive. An Israeli offense in response has led to almost 33,000 Palestinian deaths and over 75,000 injuries. And when it comes to the Israeli Defense Force, the Israeli Defense Forces have claimed significant damage to Hamas's capabilities, though when it comes to the situation remains tense with the continued threat from both the sides. and Netanyahu government now faces internal strife as well. We have seen that the far right factions, they have been threatening with withdrawal of the support over disagreements that we have seen with the military strategies. And particularly we have seen that there have been, with regard to the withdrawal that we have seen from Khan Yunis and the potential actions in Rafah. And this internal discord, along with the external pressure to resolve the hostage situation and reduce the civilian casualties, this places the Israeli government in a very precarious position. And that is something that is also forcing Netanyahu to navigate between the aggressive military tactics and at the same time the democratic negotiations for a ceasefire and the return of hostages, all the while trying to also maintain the coalition government that he is running right now. So that's why right now this is where the article says that's why this article is talking about whether he should be looking to cut for a deal or not, because there are pressures from both the sides. One, if let's say he doesn't take a very aggressive stand, some of the supporters of the government or who are a part of the coalition government, they are forcing that they have to be more aggressive here. But at the same time, we have seen that there are international pressures from all across, and also a lot of protests that have happened in a lot of major cities in Israel, where there is the other side which want this all to stop. So that is where it becomes a position where he has to understand where to go from here on. So that's why we have to see the build-up that happens in the coming days and years. I hope that within few days, months at least, these kind of things, they get resolved, and the kinds of casualties that we have been seeing all across, they have to stop at some point. Coming to the prelims based articles, the first article that we have here is Supreme Court questions center's rigid position on industrial alcohol. Now, in this context, what we are basically seeing is the story behind this probably is not that important, but the prelims base, there are a couple of words that become important for you. So that is what I'll tell you. First, the story. The story is that the Supreme Court of India, led by a 9-judge constitution bench, has been talking about a significant conflict, has been deliberating on a significant conflict between the central government and some of the state governments concerning the regulation and control of the industrial alcohol. Now, in this context, during the proceedings, the Supreme Court questioned the central government's stance of maintaining an exclusive control over industrial alcohol, which is typically used for the purposes other than human consumption. That's why in industries it is being used. Now, the court has expressed concerns over the potential misuse of industrial alcohol in the production of consumable liquor, which poses very severe public health risks. Now, the Chief Justice of India, he highlighted the grave possibility of industrial alcohol being diverted and used to produce drinkable liquor, and that's why emphasized the state's role as protectors of public health. He questioned why the state should not have the authority to regulate and prevent the misuse of industrial alcohol, and especially given the risk of alcohol related tragedies within their jurisdictions. And you might have heard of this news, every now and then you'll come across this news that because of consumption of poisonous alcohol, people lose lives. We have seen a very recent case in Punjab as well. So the central government in this context, represented by the Solicitor General Tushar Mehta, argued that the industrial alcohol falls under the category of an industry which is controlled by the union government as a part of the entry 52 of the union list in the constitution. All right, it is a part of entry 52 of the union list. So that's why this is where the things are right now, that overall, though the trade and commerce, supply, distribution, production of the products, such industries were included as a part of entry 33A of the concurrent list, this had to be read in the constance with an extension of the center's power under entry 52 of the union list. Alright, this entry 52 is of the union list. So that's why this is what has been argued by the center, that it is controlled by because it comes under the category of industry, which is controlled by the union government as a part of the entry 52 of the union list of the constitution. This control is justified in the public interest and encompasses all the aspects of such industries. But when it comes to the states argue their concern and responsibility towards preventing the misuse of industrial alcohol for producing intoxicating beverages. And that's why they have cited their powers which are extended in regulating the intoxicating liquor. So in this context, this term intoxicating liquor becomes very, very crucial. So that's why this legal tussle, this involves not just the technical classification of alcohol under the constitutional law, but also the broader issues of public health and safety as such. So that's why the states like Kerala, Maharashtra, Punjab and Uttar Pradesh, they have been raising alarms over the potential misuse of industrial alcohol. Now, when we talk about this industrial alcohol, what do we mean by industrial alcohol? There is a particular term that we use called as denatured spirit. Alright, denatured spirit, which is also called as industrial alcohol. Alright, now so denatured alcohol, denatured spirit, industrial alcohol, all the names are used. Now overall, this is something which is alcohol mixed with certain additives to make it poisonous, bad tasting, foul smelling, or you can say nauseating as well, to discourage the recreation, discouraging the consumption, let's say, of this particular spirit. So that's why what we do in case of denatured spirit is that we make it poisonous, foul smelling, bad tasting, alright, foul smelling, bad tasting, and even nauseating. It can even be nauseating, because in this case what happens is if all these things are done with certain additives, if all these things can be done, then in that case it will not be good for consumption and people will not want to consume it at all. The process of denaturing of the alcohol, it basically involves addition of certain substances to ethanol, because alcohol for consumption is ethanol. So there will be additives to this ethanol to make it unfit for human consumption without altering the properties for use in the industries. Alright, so in this particular scenario there are certain common additives that we have. For example, methanol is added, isopropyl alcohol is added, acetone is added, methyl ethyl ketone is added. So there are a lot of these things which are added to ethanol, and so I'll just write what all is added. So what do we add? One, we can add methanol. Many a times we do add methanol. So either methanol will be added, alright, either methanol will be added, or we also add isopropyl alcohol. Then we also add, sometimes we add acetone, and then after that methyl ethyl ketone. So methyl ethyl ketone. So these are some of the things that are added. Alright, these are some of the things that are added, and there are others as well, not really important. So denatured alcohol basically is used in a lot of different types of products and processes, including as a solvent in laboratories, or in manufacturing of cosmetics, in pharmaceuticals, as cleaning agent, as a fuel for or for lamps and stoves, etc. So there are all these ways in which denatured alcohol can be used. So just understand what is denatured alcohol. That is more than enough for you. Now coming to the next article, candidates have a right to privacy from voters, rules Supreme Court. Now, the Supreme Court of India recently ruled that election candidates have a right to privacy and they are not obligated to disclose every detail of their personal lives and possessions to the voters. Now, Justice Anirudh Bose and Sanjay Kumar, they basically stated that withholding of personal information which is irrelevant to a candidate's public aspirations does not constitute corrupt practice under Section 123 of the Representation of People's Act of 1951. Neither it is a defect of substantial nature under certain sections like Section 34, Section 36 Part 4 of the same, that is Representation of People's Act. So that's why this is what has been stated by the Supreme Court. Now the Supreme Court also clarified that the candidates need to declare only the assets which are significant or of significant value, or those that reflect upon their candidacy or lifestyle. The judgment also noted that the failure to disclose certain substantial assets like expensive, let's say expensive watch collection, that could be considered as a significant omission. Now this ruling, this basically had come in the context of the case of an MLA from Arunachal Pradesh, whose name is Kariko Cree. Now this person, this MLA, he was challenging a decision by the Guwahati High Court that had declared his election void for not declaring 3 vehicles as assets. Now the Supreme Court sided with Cree in this particular ruling. The ruling that vehicles no longer, because there were vehicles that was no longer owned by him at the time of the election. So that's why the Supreme Court said that at the time of the election, these vehicles are not owned by him. So these assets need not be declared. The judgment emphasized that the balance between voters' rights to essential candidate information and the candidates' rights, privacy rights, they have to be taken care of. So that's why some things which are relevant, they have to be declared, but things which are irrelevant to a certain person's candidacy need not be declared. But whatever is important for somebody's candidacy and also which reflects upon the lifestyle of the candidate, all these things, they should be declared. But things which are irrelevant for the voter, if they are not even given or they have not been declared, it's not an issue. So this is basically what we have seen in this particular ruling. So must disclose only those assets of significant value or those directly reflect upon their candidacy and lifestyle. This is the basic takeaway from this particular article. Now coming to the next article, Peter Higgs, I'm sorry about this. This is on page number 14 and related to science and tech. Peter Higgs, who proposed existence of God particle, dies. Now Peter Higgs, he has been a Nobel Prize winning physicist, renowned mainly for predicting the existence of Higgs boson, which is also called as the God particle. Alright, so Higgs boson, and this Higgs boson is called as the God particle. Now in this particular scenario, he has now passed away at the age of 94. Now he has been very important in the entire context of what we know as God particle today, and what we also call as the entire setup of particle physics. So we'll discuss about, we have to understand those aspects of what is particle physics and all this. Now Higgs boson basically is something which is very essential in the understanding of how subatomic particles they acquire mass, something which is a very key component of the standard model of physics. Now this theory that was given, this theory was published in 1964 and tried to explain how the particles gain mass through the newly discovered subatomic particle according to him. Now this groundbreaking work also earned him a Nobel Prize in 2013 in physics, and it was also shared with some of the other prominent scientists as well. Now overall, when it comes to the understanding of all this, just try to understand some of the basic parts of what we are actually discussing here. When it comes to particles, understand the importance of Higgs boson and where exactly do we stand. So look at this picture, and I don't know whether this picture makes sense for you, but let me just try to make some sense out of it. Look at this side. You have two things. You have quarks and you have leptons. Now these quarks basically are subatomic particles, and these are the fundamental particles that lead to the formation of the particles where you have heard some names. Alright, so quarks. Now these quarks, they lead to the formation of something called as hadrons. Now I'm not sure whether you've heard of hadrons or not, doesn't matter. You might have heard of the Large Hadron Collider, the LHC experiment at CERN. If you have heard of it, Large Hadron Collider, LHC. So there, Large Hadron Collider is trying to collide hadron particles. So hadrons basically are fundamental particles. What you know are these two particles that hadrons form: protons and neutrons. A sigh of relief. Have you heard of these two particles, protons and neutrons? So these protons and neutrons, they are basically formed from hadrons, and hadrons come from quarks. Alright, so that's why quarks become important from this perspective. And similarly, you have leptons. Now these leptons, they lead to the formation of three particles. Again, one that you have heard of, electrons, right? Electrons you have heard of. Apart from that, there are muons and there are taus, which are not, let's say, important in the context of our discussion. So these three particles that we have right here, electrons, protons and neutrons, they basically form the atom, correct? They form the atom, right? They form the atom because these are particles which are stable particles. Alright, these are all stable particles. These are stable particles. On the other hand, when it comes to muons and taus, these are unstable particles. These are unstable particles, and that's why they do not exist for very long, and they would quickly convert into electrons. Alright, they'll quickly convert into electrons, and these are stable particles, and that's why they will form the atom. And you know, atom is the basic building block of everything that you have around you, right? So now this is about this part. Alright, this is about this part, and just know one thing, that we are talking about matter. So atom, at least apart from here on, you know the story that atoms will lead to the formation of molecules, and these molecules will form matter, correct? Right? These molecules will form matter. So that's why all these particles are called as matter particles or fermions. Fermions basically are called as matter particles. Why matter particles? Because they are the ones which are forming matter. So forget about what is up and down, charm and strange, top and bottom, not required. Just remember quarks, that quarks lead to formation of hadrons, and then hadrons lead to the formation of protons and neutrons. Now, so this is one side where you have fermions. On the other side, you have force particles or the force carriers. These are the force particles or force carriers which are called as bosons. Now in case of bosons, we have four types of bosons. Just see here. You have gluons. We have here gluons. So these gluons, they are related to something what we call as strong nuclear force. Strong nuclear force. Now these strong nuclear force, they are the ones, they are trying to bind the nucleus. If you remember, you might remember that protons and neutrons, they are found inside the nucleus of an atom, correct? They are found inside the nucleus of an atom. So binding of this nucleus, holding all the protons and neutrons together, this is done by the strong nuclear force. So gluons are the particles which are responsible for the strong nuclear force. Then we have photons. Photons are related to electromagnetic force, basically electricity and magnetism, right? So electricity and magnetism, it basically comes from these particles called as photons. And then we have these two particles, W and Z bosons, which are related to weak nuclear force. They are related to weak nuclear force, which are related to the forces between the subatomic particles. So we have strong nuclear force, weak nuclear force, and electromagnetic force. And then there is Higgs. All right. Then there is Higgs. Now Higgs, basically, when it comes to the Higgs boson basically gives, you can say, provides the mass to the particles. Just understand this, that what we are basically saying is that because of Higgs boson provides the key to understanding of how fundamental particles acquire mass. All right. So how fundamental particles, they acquire mass. They provide the key understanding of how fundamental particles acquire mass. All right, how fundamental particles acquire mass. So that's why this becomes very, very crucial, that what basically the standard, something called as the standard model of particle physics, what it basically says is that particles acquire mass through their interaction with the Higgs field, which permeates the entire universe. And Higgs boson basically is the manifestation of this field. Similar to how, let's say, photons are related to electromagnetic field, or gluons are related to the strong nuclear force. Similarly, the Higgs boson is basically leading to giving mass, providing mass to every particle that exists, everything that exists in this particular universe. So that's why, in a manner, it is the confirmation of a lot of things that we understand as a part of the basic forces or the basic fundamental particles. So except for gravitational force, all the other three forces, the strong nuclear force, the weak nuclear force, and the electromagnetic force, all these things are actually confirmed by this particular particle. So that's why this becomes important. This is the context in which it becomes important, that it helps us in understanding of the entire universe's structure, the mechanism by which the particles gain mass. They become crucial for understanding of the structure of the universe itself. Without the Higgs boson, the particles would not have had any mass at all. So the universe as we know, the planets, the stars, the galaxies, they would not have existed at all. We would not have existed, and you would not have to go through the pain of trying to understand this highly scientific context. So that's why all these things, they all come from this perspective of the Higgs boson. So that's why his contribution to this field becomes very crucial. Now lastly, looking at the last article, health sector can't ignore the green gains from telemedicine, the study says. Now what exactly are we seeing? So first thing, we are talking about telemedicine. We are talking about telemedicine. So what is telemedicine? Telemedicine is when we are providing any kind of healthcare service with the help of some kind of communication. maybe through satellite, maybe through the internet, where we do not really need to be physically present to get that healthcare service. So that is called as telemedicine. Now, what is the context? There was a study that was conducted by the LV Prasad Eye Institute in Hyderabad, and this highlighted the significant benefit of teleconsultations, showing that 70 to 80% of the eye hospital visitors could instead use telemedicine facilities for their concerns, which are not really severe enough to necessitate a hospital visit. And this approach not only conserves time and resources for the patients, particularly those who are coming from the remote areas or economically disadvantaged areas, but also presents a very substantial advantage in reducing the emissions which are associated with the healthcare. The research basically talks about telemedicine as both patient friendly and environmentally beneficial. And that's why a very vital consideration when it comes to India, where majority of the population resides in the rural areas. And given the substantial carbon footprint which is associated with traveling to the urban healthcare centers, the study also reveals that teleconsultations can lead to very fewer traveling, and hence it can decrease the carbon dioxide emission as well. So that's why in case of telemedicine, it says two things. One, that it will be patient friendly. It will be patient friendly, and second, it will be environmentally friendly as well. It will be environment friendly as well. So that's why specifically over a 3-month period, it basically resulted in almost 1600 fewer kilometers traveled by patients, and on an average reduction of 176 kg of carbon emissions. And that's why this reduction is very critical against the backdrop of India's healthcare sector, which has been responsible for approximately 3% of the total carbon dioxide emission that has happened in India, according to a report conducted study conducted for 2014. So that's why this is where it basically is, where it says that telemedicine can become very, very crucial in this context, because overall, even let's say the follow-ups, the system particularly becomes beneficial for follow-up patients, which also allows them to avoid traveling to a tertiary hospital for subsequent visit, and also for the new patients who are seeking a second opinion before undergoing a certain kind of treatment. And that's why in assessment of the impact, the study basically talks about all these aspects. And you also have to understand that more than it being patient friendly and environmental friendly as well, we have to also understand that the calculation of the carbon footprint and the economic impact, including the cost on saving the fuel or on saving the travel time, on food, all these things also are where you have certain benefits. Also, instead of traveling to, let's say, not a very good hospital in the nearby areas, they can actually consult over telemedicine facilities with a very good hospital as well. So there are all these things that we'll see, and these things can actually help along with the different factors that we have. So that's where it might also lead to better services, and maybe also access to better hospitals. So that's why there are all these aspects of telemedicine that we have to understand. So telemedicine is nothing but only where we are saying that instead of physically going for getting any kind of healthcare service, this is where the interaction can happen over a phone, over the internet, over a video call, or something like this. So this is what this article is about. Now lastly, let's look at the two questions from the mains perspective. Examine the disproportionate impact of climate change on women and girls, particularly in developing countries. Discuss the role that empowering women can play in climate action and sustainable development. So something that we discussed in our second article. So in that context, you have to write the answer, and those discussions can be used here to write the answer. Examine the complexities and challenges faced by Israel's domestic politics and international relations in the context of ongoing conflict in Gaza. So as we discussed, that there are pressures on both the sides, one which is a very aggressive side and the second one where it talks about the stoppage of every kind of violence that we see right now in Gaza. So that's why all those areas of what are the problems and what are the solutions, all those things have to be brought in this particular answer. So with this, we come to the end of the session today. Thank you very much for being here.